Let me jump right in. The live-action Death Note is not as bad as everyone said it was, and a lot of people think it's a flaming pile of dog crap. I am still of the belief that the vastly different live actions perform better because they are trying to be their own thing. The live-action anime adaptations that try to stay too close to the source material get hurt by that. They try to follow the plot line exactly for like 20 hours worth of content that they have to fit into 2 hours at most. Sometimes 2.5, and it just ends up being a soulless rush of a mess. Death Note, however, stays away from that by being so vastly different from the source material that it makes it easier to separate the source material from the live-action anime adaptation. Less comparisons equals typically a better movie. But let's actually talk about the movie. The intro gives us, well, an intro to Light Turner's character in the movie. He's egotistical, and he's very open about it, which we know is different from the manga, because while Light Yagami is definitely extremely egotistical, he's definitely not upfront about it, preferring to play more of a behind-the-scenes role. And then we're introduced to Willem Dafoe's Ryuk, and it's honestly the best part about this movie. He captures the character excellently, and with his introduction, he does bring a sense of terror that makes Light's reaction so much more realistic. And hilarious. But take that in comparison with the way Yagami reacts, and from this point, when I compare, I'm just going to refer to them as Turner and Yagami respectively. His chill and coordinating surprise. And then you have Turner shrieking. The start of this movie alone shows off the differences they are trying to depict. I think the crazy part of this movie is how every death that occurs happens in some kind of Final Destination way. Like this first dude who dies, it feels exactly like something out of a Final Destination movie, with the whole car swerve and ladder swinging head go floosh thing. This movie also shows that the relationship between Turner and his dad is a bit on the rocks. Albeit, Yagami was willing to kill his dad, there was never really any bad blood. Yagami was just willing to do what he thought needed to be done. Ryuk still likes apples. That's one character quirk you could never take away. One thing to note here is Turner is in no way as smart as Yagami. Yagami would never explicitly target someone who would lead a direct connection to him like Turner did. While yes, it is still early in the Kira days, tracking it back would still make it easy to find him, which is something we will talk about later in this video because it gets addressed later in the movie. But then again, most of Turner's deaths are specific, so it leaves less of a pattern than repeated heart attacks, which definitely makes it harder to believe that they could tell something was going on. Most of the deaths were accidents. The fact that Turner is so hesitant about answering what the Death Note is, and then telling Mia his whole secret, like, he could have just said, "Oh, it's my notebook." And then there's this change to the rule that only the keeper of the Death Note can see the Shinigami, and it's weird, but it doesn't really affect the story. I'm more upset about Turner's brain being turned to mashed potatoes because of the power of boners. He just shows her what the Death Note can do without a second thought. No risk assessment or anything, just, I like this girl, so let's show her how I murder people. And wow, this is moving fast. They are already making out and shit. Yagami didn't actually care about anyone. Everyone was just a tool to be used by him. And even when he did tell someone, it was with good reason and planning. But the American version is of course going to try to make the character more human. It makes Turner a less interesting character than Yagami, but still not a terrible one. Also, Kira does not mean killer in Japanese. It generally means sparkle or twinkle in the sense of a name. Kira is just the Japanese pronunciation of the English word. So, no, it doesn't sort of mean killer. Now, Lakeith Stanfield as L is introduced. And while hearing that on paper sounds weird, I think he does really well in this role. He does a few things completely out of character from L, but as we know, pretty much everyone is out of character in this movie. So it isn't anything that you can really judge too harshly, but we'll definitely talk about it when we get there. Next, we have the whole plot point, which isn't too focused on, so it's not really a plot point, but it's still there. The police department that Turner's father works for is pretty much completely loyal to Kira, while Turner's father doesn't share that sentiment. So they leave him a note telling him to eat shit. And we know in the manga, they aren't loyal to Kira. They feared him, but they still did their job. One thing to point out here. L comes up with this theory, this fucking nutty theory, that Turner came up with the name Kira to try to make them think he's Japanese, when we know that's complete bull of shit. He literally picks Kira because it's his name in another language. Fun fact, it is not his name in Russian or Celtic, and because it sounds like killer. So right now, it makes it look like L is trying to make Turner seem smarter than he is, which is weird. Alright, anyways, first key difference. L showing himself in public for an announcement is so far out of character. As we know, in the manga, his initial public announcement was by a fake L used to lure out the specific location of where Light was. Then, when he talks, it's just an L on the screen saying, haha, I got you, you got bamboozled. While he doesn't show his face in the movie or announce his name, it just feels weird. We'll talk more about the specific plot holes at the end of the video, though. And here we get back into the differences of Turner and Yagami. Yagami would have written his dad's name in a heartbeat, while Turner would rather quit using the death note than to kill his own dad. It makes it feel off. Like, Yagami's whole thing is his conviction to make the world a better place. It's a part of the discussion with, is he really good or is he really bad? This conviction allows him to think that he's doing the right thing no matter the cost, while Turner is using the death note like it's a child's game. Now the scene in the cafe, it's so bad, plot-wise. Turner completely implicates himself, arguing with L over what Kira would want. It honestly should have been game over right here, but L didn't have the brains to actually bring Turner in, and even showed him his face. Up until this point, L has been somewhat smart. The one thing this movie does so wrong, different story from the source material or not, it's the emotional aspect. These characters like Yagami and L are some of the smartest people in the world, and with those smarts comes a lack of emotion. This lack of emotion is due to them being only logical thinkers and not emotional. They are able to put their personal feelings aside for the goal at hand. L lashing out at Turner over Watari completely distorts this aspect. They ruin their view of innocence or their evidence to go off of because of things going on emotionally, like Turner and his father and L with Watari. I'm not saying you can't be smart and an emotional thinker, but everything about these characters is being shifted in the wrong direction because of that aspect. The biggest thing I can say about this movie is that it doesn't feel like a battle of the minds or a chess game. Nothing feels planned. Elle and Turner are just going step by step, not really trying to stay ahead of the other person, just following what the plot tells them to do. I think the strangest part of this movie is how they try to counteract that. While Turner is the brains, I say that, I don't really mean it, but I do, I guess. Mia is the one who will do whatever is necessary. She just isn't as smart. And while Mia was extremely kill-happy in the manga, it was due to her emotions. She wanted to do whatever she could to make Yagami happy. But then we get Elle breaking out the Men in Black pistol to go murder Turner, pow pow, once again completely out of character and stupid, because now he's wanted too. As I said, I think Lakeith Stanfield is an excellent actor, and he could perform this role amazingly. The writing is what fucked it up for him, though. And while this is happening, Turner is trying to find a way to get out of dying since Mia wrote his name down in a page of the death note she ripped out, with her telling him that the only way to get out of it is by passing the book to her because she thinks she's better than him, which again is completely out of character. You see the recurring theme here? All I gotta say, American cinema loves their chase scenes. Can't have an action movie without one. I'd say, how did Elle know to go up the stairs to chase Turner, but Turner literally leaves a trail of shit he's knocked over. Mia dies, the movie's coming to an end, and then we find out that Turner's apparently actually smart, as he planned out pretty much the entire end of the movie. Oh, and Turner's dad knows he's Kira, even though he was the only one who didn't support Kira. He's just like, fuck it. It's my son, I guess. Oh, and apparently Elle is so salty about losing, he writes Turner's name in the death note. We don't know if it actually happens, but it seems likely based off of Turner's and Ryuk's reaction at the end. But let's talk about those plot holes real quick. First off, Light Turner just writes Watari down, and that's not Watari's name, it's an alias, so that shouldn't work, but it does. They say that Anthony was the first victim when he wasn't. It was actually the bully at the beginning. He controls what the paper that has his name written on it does with the death note, which should be impossible because the death note can't control the paper floating into a fire. Like, it can't control the wind. The paper would... You see what I mean? Plot hole. And lastly, Elle says that Kira is in Seattle because the city saw the broadcast of the hostage situation. But the hostage situation was being broadcasted online where Turner and Mia watched it, meaning anyone across the world could have watched it. So they shouldn't have been able to find his location based off of that. And that's the movie. The good and the bad. Well, I don't think this movie is terrible by any means, it's still kind of bad. Too many plot holes, too many nonsensical decisions made by characters who are supposed to be smart, and then when you bring the comparison into the source material, it just gets worse from there. The movie would have been much better if it wasn't named Death Note, but of course, if that was the case, we wouldn't have Willem Dafoe's Ryuk, which, again, is amazing. Next video, I'm going to take a look at the first movie out of the trilogy, I think it's a trilogy, of the Japanese-made live action of Death Note. I've never seen it, so it should be a fun watch.